Hi everybody, this is Ellen Rubin and I'm here today. I'm going to show you how to correct mistakes and a little bit of how to avoid those mistakes as well. So stay tuned. Here we go. Hi everybody. So the first thing that I'm going to go over is actually how to avoid some mistakes. One of the easiest ways that people make mistakes is at the beginning of their work, where they will have their yarn laying to the back of their work, and therefore the first stitch really appears to be, or looks as though it is 2 stitches, but when in fact it's actually 1 stitch. So to avoid making that mistake and then thereby having to correct it later on, you want to keep your yarn laying to the front of your work. So then the next thing I'm going to go over now is also how to avoid making twisted stitches. Twisted stitches, and I've put a couple of them in my piece of work here already because later on we're going to fix them. Twisted stitches look like this right here, where the stitch is not completely open. It's in fact twisted, because when the stitches are knitted they should be open. So here's a twisted stitch, and I'm going to put a stitch marker here to designate that this is a mistake that I want to fix later on, because I don't actually have to rip it out. I put another one in here, which you can see is right here. Now it appears to be harder to see because it's actually the same color as the yarn. So I wanted to put another mistake in here where it's a little more difficult to see that it's actually a mistake until you actually stretch out your work. So the mistake is also over here. So I'm going to put another stitch marker over here. To avoid making a twisted stitch, I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So I'm going to say you're knitting along, and it's very easy for stitches to pop off your needle, especially if you're using metal needles. I have a lot of preferences for different types of needles with different yarns, and for beginner knitters I always prefer not using metal needles. So say you're going along and your stitch drops off. When you put it back on, you want to make sure to get it back in the proper orientation. And when I say proper orientation, I like to think of this stitch as legs, human legs, if you want to think of it like that. It's an upside down letter U, sort of like this. This is the left leg, this is the right leg. As you can see here on this needle here, the left leg is behind your stitch, I mean behind your needle, and the right leg is in front of the needle. So if it falls off and you put it back on in the improper direction, then one of two things: you can look to the left of that stitch to see, does this look like it's on in the same direction? And if it's not in the same direction, all you have to do is you can manually turn it around like this with your hand, or what I prefer to do is I prefer to take my right needle and turn it around. But if you do get in a twisted stitch like has been designated here on these other needles, you will find one thing to be true. When you try to insert this needle, it'll be a little bit tighter and harder. So if as you're working along, you find that the stitch is on there too tight, perhaps the stitch is on incorrectly and you want to take a look at it first. The other thing is that when you insert the needle, if you stretch your work, you can see you get something that appears to be an X. That is actually your twisted stitch. So, like I said, you want to just turn it around. So I'm going to continue going across this row, and I'm going to insert some mistakes here. And another common mistake is the incomplete stitch. An incomplete stitch is when you insert your needle, wrap it around, and you pull through, but it doesn't go all the way through, and you don't realize that has happened. So I usually fix this mistake on the following row. It's really not very apparent at all when you are working with the same colored yarn. And that's wherein lies the difficulty. So I'm going to go across a little bit more. I'm going to put another mistake on this row because we're going to actually fix it on the next row. So let me quickly go across, and then I think you'll be able to see where the mistake is, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. All right, so I am all the way across, and I'm going to put a few more mistakes because there's two different ways to fix this mistake, whether you are on the knit side or the purl side if you're working on stockinette stitch. There is some slight variations if you're working in garter stitch or something like that, but this is where it most commonly happens. So I'm going to go across, I'm going to go purlwise and make a few purl mistakes that I can fix when I get to the knit side. Now, the way you can tell that you have a mistake is this. When you approach it, and I'm going to put it on the cable needle now, so on the cable part of this circular needle, so you can see it a little bit better. Here is a mistake, and another mistake that I put is right here. Again, like I said, if you're working with a solid colored yarn, it's very difficult to pick out this mistake until you're on the following row. So that's why I'm showing you how to correct it on this row, which is the opposite. The mistake was made on the knit side. This is the little bit more difficult of the two mistakes to fix, but even then it is not that difficult. So I'm going to keep going across, and what happens is all of a sudden I will see something that looks like this. And the reason why I'm using colored yarn like I am is because if you look here, this burgundy stitch really should be on the top here, and this purple stitch should really be at the base of this stitch here. You see all this little bump, the bump is purple. So the way to fix it is that you're going to take the second stitch in on the left needle and lift it over the first stitch that's closer to the tip and then off. It's a little bit easier to do this process if you take your work, lean it over like this, and then take this second stitch here. I enter from this side here, lift it over, and then drop it off. And now you can see that this stitch has been corrected. We're going to go across to the next mistake so I can repeat it and you can see it. The way that I like to demonstrate this is to have my students actually correct the mistakes, and since we can't do that and we're only doing this by video, perhaps you can go along and make the mistake also by not popping it through the stitch, and I will review that again. So that would be as if you're going like this, wrapping around, not pushing or pulling your needle away depending on you're in a knit stitch or a purl stitch. So pretend I forgot to do this, pop it through, and I went to and I thought it had popped through. So this next stitch is a purl stitch, and then if I look at this subsequent stitch here, I can see that it doesn't look correct. And by the way, it's going to take a while before you actually figure out what kind of mistake you made. The key really is to just keep trying to fix your mistakes. The more that you practice fixing your mistakes, you may not always be successful in correcting it properly, but you will gradually start making fewer and fewer mistakes and then also be able to correct them. So, like I did previously, I'm going to lean this forward a little bit towards me, put my thumb here, I take the second piece of yarn, come in from the right side of that stitch. I like to think of this as the left side of this stitch. This is the right side of the stitch. Lift it over the first stitch and then off. And now it's been corrected. So I'm going to go all the way across now. Now I'm going to fix the stitches that were actually made on the purl side. because I put in a few of those. Those stitches were made on the knit side, and then it's easier to fix as you're going along. I always try to fix my mistake on the following row because I prefer not ripping my stitches off the needle. But that's going to be the last thing that we do. That's going to be the fail-safe. If nothing else, we're going to be able to put the stitches back on after we've made a bad mistake and ripped it out. All right, so I'm going to go across here, and I know that I've made at least 3 mistakes on the purl side that will now show up on the knit side. So I'm just going to keep going across, but you know what, for the heck of it, I'm going to show you. If we look at it like this, there's a mistake there. Here's another mistake, and it looks like I actually only made 2. So I'm going to keep going across until I get to this mistake. And then all of a sudden I see this. And again, this is an incomplete stitch, meaning that I did the first step where I inserted the needle, I did the second step where I wrapped it around the needle counterclockwise, third step, it didn't pop through the stitch, but I dropped it off. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I don't have to flip it towards me. I'm going to take the second piece of yarn, insert the needle to the right side of that stitch as if it was purlwise, put my finger here, lift it over that first stitch and then off. And now I have fixed this stitch. I'm going to go across all the way to the other mistake that I have here. And again, here I am, all of a sudden, I see something that doesn't look right. What it usually looks like is one stitch, and then if I flip it over, this is what it looks like as well. So what I need to do is lift that red piece of yarn over the purple yarn and then drop it off. I'm going to enter purlwise, lift it over that stitch, and then drop it off. And now it has been corrected. So the next thing that I like to review is how to tink. Now, whether or not you've been knitting a long time or a little bit of time, tinking means you're knitting backwards because you are actually knitting backwards. How do you spell knit backwards? T-I-N-K. So you will commonly hear knitters say, oh, I have to tink back this row. So this is the way that you tink. I like to hold on to the yarn really taut in my right hand. And if you're a continental knitter for all this stuff, it's the same thing. It's just slightly different in that where you're holding the yarn. So say that I've made a mistake. Actually, we're going to tink all the way back to this stitch over here, because these stitches are all composed, like for instance, this stitch here where this blue marker is, where that mistake is composed of the stitch that's all the way above it. And what we're going to do is fix it by dropping that stitch and then using a crochet hook. So to tink, I'm going to hold this yarn taut so that I can see where the stitch is coming out. It is coming out from directly below the stitch that's on the right needle. If you see the purple right here, the first step I'm going to do is insert my left needle into that stitch. And key is really keeping this yarn taut, making this an open stitch so you can insert the needle straight through. So that is the step number 1. Step number 2 is to drop the stitch that's on the right needle. Step 3 is to yank on the yarn here. So I'm going to hold the yarn taut, enter from below, straight through. That's step 1. Step 2, drop the stitch off of the right needle and then tug on the yarn that's in my hand. So step 1, step 2, step 3. Then I'm going to continue all the way till I get back to this blue stitch marker so that we can learn how to drop that stitch and fix it. So I'm going to stretch it here, enter below, the stitch that's directly below the right needle, drop it off, then yank on the yarn. So step 1, insert it below the stitch. Step 2, drop it off of the yarn on the right needle, yank on the yarn, insert, drop, yank. So let me go all the way across to that blue. And really key, like I said, is to stretch this yarn so that you can see this hole that's below the stitch that's on the needle. I find it handy to put a stitch marker with the mistake, so it's very easy for me to see exactly where the mistake is and where I need to fix it. So when I get to this point where I say, oh my goodness, I accidentally twisted a stitch, now I want to fix it because it's going to stand out like a sore thumb on my finished work, I've tinked back to this spot, and now I'm going to intentionally drop this purple stitch off of the right needle. Then I'm going to create what we call, or I like to call, ladders. I'm going to undo. Now I can take this. Did you notice that this is a sheep? There's its eye. And there's the fluffy part of the sheep. All right, take that out. I'm going to undo it until I get to right here where this stitch is twisted. So I'm going to keep going, pull it out. I am then going to untwist this stitch so that it's straight. It's just like an upside down letter U, and that it is no longer twisted. The next step, which may seem a little bit tricky, and this is why I like to lay it down on a table. This is also the reason why I'm using this very colorful yarn. You can go up, you're going to be going up one rung at a time and take this stitch and then recreate your stockinette stitch. If you're using a thinner weight of yarn, this is a worsted weight yarn, and smaller needles, it'll be very difficult to see this last rung here. So just double check that that you have caught that one. I frequently turn this over to the other side to make sure that I've caught all the rungs of my ladder when I go to correct it. So the first step is to take your crochet hook, and you're going to make sure that this loop is no longer twisted, and go in straight from the front. Oh, the other key thing, I usually slide these stitches on so that I don't have the possibility that they fall off just like they just did. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my crochet hook. I'm holding the rest of the rungs of the ladder on my index finger, and I'm going to then take the next rung of the ladder and put it in front of my crochet hook. The next step may be a little bit tricky, but there's a key to it. I like to put tension on this beige piece of yarn by pulling upwards, and then I'm going to take it such that I catch the hook and grab it and pull it through that burgundy piece of yarn. A little tip and technique that I like to have so that they are still remain centered on this the rung of the ladder is to do this. I go underneath here, pull it and catch it, and then I'm going to take this hook and slide it a little bit to the left so that it doesn't distort the fabric from where it was originally. If I were to do that without giving it a little yank to the left, what I would find is that the stitches might be a little bit distorted, but when you go to block it, that it would be fine. So the next time I'm going to go here, put the hook underneath, turn it in this direction, have some tension on this second piece of purple yarn close to the hook, and pull it through. Now sometimes it might split a little bit and you have to then just pull a little bit harder. So I'm going to just yank on it a little bit more. The next step is I'm going to go up here, grab this beige piece of yarn again, or I should say brown, and pull it through. And now that I have gotten the last stitch, what I'm going to do is put it onto the left needle by taking the left needle and coming in from the front of the stitch. It's really actually from the right side. That's the left side of the stitch. The right side of the stitch is here. If I come in from the right side of the stitch and insert it here, then I will see that my stitches is on in the proper direction. So I'm going to then knit across until the next mistake. And like I said previously, I will know that I'm there when that stitch matches up with the one that's right above it on the needle. So I can see here that I have one more stitch to knit. Voila. I'm now going to take my stitch marker out, my pink sheep. Going to drop this off. There's the twisted stitch down here. Then open up the rungs of this ladder here by yanking on here. Then I'm going to turn this stitch here so it's no longer twisted, so that it's like an upside down U. Then I'm going to put the hook on here, pull up, catch that rung of the ladder and pull through. Do it again and again and again. Oops, that one didn't go all the way. So frequently I will back it off and just do it again if I don't like the way it looks. Now I'm going to put it back on the needle by going straight through, put it on, and voila. I have the stitches. I've corrected my mistake there. Now I'm going to go over your worst case scenario. Say you're working on a sweater or something and you were told to work 5.5 inches, but you were overzealous and you had 6.5 inches, and you now need to take out some of your knitting to remove some of the fabric. The way I like to do this is you certainly could tink back each and every stitch on the row, but I find the easiest way to do this is to actually take this off of the needles here. You're going to rip back a couple of inches or whatever you need to do. And what I like, I'm going to show you, I'm going to take out one more row. So say this is where I need to be at the beginning of the row. Maybe I also needed to do a decrease and I forgot to do a decrease. I like to have it such that the yarn tail is here, and then I flip my work over because one of two things. I'm either going to use a circular needle to put my stitches back on, and I want to go down at least 2 or 3 needle sizes. The reason for that is that as I'm trying to put these stitches back onto the needle, if I use the same size needle, they're just going to keep coming undone, and we don't want to do that. The circumference of this stitch has already been determined by the previous row with the right size needle, so we can just use either a smaller, here's a smaller needle that I'm going to use to put the stitches back on. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to have the attached piece of yarn to the ball on my left side and the piece that is not attached on my right side. The next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to come from behind each and every one of these stitches, and I want to make sure that they are on in the proper orientation. So I'm going to come from behind this stitch here. Now they might be slightly off to the side, but if I come in from underneath, I just come from behind and put them on the needle. The other thing is this yarn has is multi-ply. I also don't worry even if my stitch is on the wrong way or if it's slightly split, and I'll explain that in a minute, because I just really want to get the stitches on the needle, and I can actually fix it as I go across the needle. So I'm just going to get some of these on the needle, some of them on the right way, some on the wrong way. But to do it properly, you want to have this, let me show you right here. This is an open, there's an open space over here, and I'm coming from behind this stitch. So I'm going to come behind each of these stitches here and put it on. Now I'm doing this on purpose, putting them some on very kind of haphazardly, but if you, like I said, come in from behind this stitch, make sure it's not twisted, then you'll have it on in the right orientation. When I get to the second to the last stitch, I'm going to slow down and I'm going to make sure that the yarn tail is not attached to it, which it is not. The tricky part is that this last stitch is composed of the first stitch and the last stitch of the previous row. And I want to fix that so that it's only one stitch, not two. So I will intentionally pull this out so that it's as if this last stitch was not knit. So I'm going to put this needle, the one that I used, put this last stitch back on the needle in the proper direction. So I'm going to come straight back through it so that this is like an upside down U with that right leg leading to the front. And then I'm going to just purl the last stitch. Now, granted, this needle is a smaller needle than what I'm using here, but it's not going to make a difference for one stitch, because the next stitch I'm going to then use the properly sized needle that I was using to work. One other little point that I'd like to say is that a lot of times another mistake that commonly happens, if you can pretend for a moment that I had all these stitches not on the wooden needle but here, another mistake is that people frequently, this last stitch, this actually happens where they will go like this, insert the needle, wrap it around, and they think they've popped it through and they haven't, and then they go and they turn their work around and they say, oops, what happened? What happened was this last stitch wasn't knit. So you just want to put it back in the proper direction, knit or purl I should say, wrap it around, pop it through, and voila. So now, even though I have some of these stitches on the improper direction, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go across and fix it as I go along. So this one's on proper, so I'm going to keep going across. I can see that this stitch looks a little split because you can see this little piece hanging down. To fix that, I'm going to just rejoin the yarn and play with it a little bit so that it becomes solid and a complete stitch. Oops, sorry about that. Well, this is another thing. Oops, it happens. You just slide it back on in the proper orientation. So let me quickly go across here, and we will see that a few of these stitches are in split or on backwards, and I just play with them until they rejoin if they're split, and if they're on the backwards, I already know how they're supposed to lay. This one's just split, but I put a few on here for you to see what it looks like when it's on backwards. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to make sure your stitch is open and is not split. This is your worst case scenario, and you know, we hope that it doesn't happen very often, but it does. One other part of wisdom that I'd like to impart to you, again, I can't emphasize enough that you're gonna make mistakes. I've been teaching knitting for 20 years now. I still make mistakes. I know people that have knit longer than myself, and they still make mistakes. So it is part of the process of knitting or crocheting, anything. You're always gonna make some mistakes. So I'm going across here. I put a few on here backwards just to show you. And Here's a split yarn. I'm gonna just flip that down real quickly. Here's another piece of split yarn. I can see where that belongs. And voila, I'm at the end of the row. I have corrected everything, and I hope you have enjoyed this lesson on how to correct mistakes. And take care, stay safe, and have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.